We can talk about what we've been working on.
Yeah.
I've been doing some Node stuff.
I haven't been working on anything.
Nice. Email course.
I'm cruising. I'm cruising off the backs of the proletariat. In this case, you.
We can talk about the email course. Dude, you're not. Dude, you've been doing a lot.
I'm just kidding.
Email course.
I just like the idea of building a business where I get to cruise off the backs of the proletariat. We have been working on an email course. We actually have an email course. It's a secret email course. It's a secret for most people.
But it will be public by the time this is published.
It will. There's 31 people who are aware of this email course.
Our 31 beta testers.
31 beta testers. It's called Stop Writing Crappy Components, actually.
We don't have a name for it.
We don't have a name for it.
But it's about component design.
Yeah, it used to be called Top 5 Things, and then it became 6. So now we're just postponing on the name.
Might be 7.
Yeah, who knows?
No, it's definitely not going to be 7. It's 6 things.
6 things to help you write better components in Ember.
Yeah.
We wanted to take a lot of the lessons that we've been teaching on the site and put it into an email course. And, part of what we've been learning about making products, it's funny because I feel like with salesy type things in the old days, it's like it feels dirty. And these days, the way people do sales is actually by like giving people value. So you think about people we admire online, like Adam and Steve, who are doing the refactoring UI stuff. They give away a bunch of great content for free, and it makes you want more from them because they've demonstrated that they have something to teach you. So we realized with EmberMap, there's a lot of stuff we have on the site, but it's a big ask if you don't know us or don't trust us yet to come and just sign up for a subscription. And, obviously if we could snap our fingers and give away everything for free, then we would, but we have to make this sustainable. So the question is, what can we do as a stepping stone before asking you to sit down and watch hours and hours of videos to tell you that we might actually have something that's a good fit for you? That's really the goal, right?
And I think to that point, like it is a big ask to come and subscribe. And I think a lot of our subscribers are people that know us from the Ember community, or the way that Ember gets introduced to a company is they know us through conference talks, Mirage,
right.
Open source. This email course is more of a way to like solidify all this stuff and have it align with the EmberMap stuff that we're doing.
Right.
So it's like teaching in email, then teaching in videos.
Right.
And so, yeah.
So yeah, trying to distill down all the stuff that the most important stuff that we teach and, put it into the email course. So it's, and we realized really a lot of it is not necessarily about Ember, right? It's a lot of the patterns apply for any UI framework you're using that's component based.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, it's all in Ember. So the syntax is all Ember.
Right.
But yeah, you can take this knowledge to any other framework.
Right. Yeah, it's cool. I feel like the component pattern stuff is neat because it's kind of not OOP. It's kind of not like programming design patterns, but it kind of is too. Like there's things about single responsibility in there, but how that looks in when you're building a UI out of components is a little bit different, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I was working on some of the marketing copy today, and it kind of struck me as I was just like reviewing all the articles, and it struck me that like all these lessons, they kind of like categorize a whole bunch of ways you can create components, and all these lessons, like they will fall back to like kind of like design patterns of components.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be able to like, you'll read this lesson, maybe create a component, and you'll be like, oh yeah, that's a renderless component.
Mm-hmm.
It like fits nicely into this category.
Right.
And so this course, I think you'll walk away with like, you know what type of component you're building when you sit down to start a task. You'll know it like fits neatly right into one of these buckets.
Mm-hmm. And we think that's a super valuable thing to just even have names for stuff, even if you're already using it, just to get everyone on the same page and have some consensus around it. And now you can just say, oh, you need a renderless provider component here. And it's like, oh, okay, I know exactly what you mean.
Yep. So yeah, contextual component, it's just not enough.
Right. It's too broad. It encapsulates too many things.
And so, yeah, renderless, providerless, the data building blocks.
Providerless. That's a new one.
Provider. Renderless provider.
Providerless provider.
Providerless.
We have to go deeper.
It just does nothing. Yeah. It's a no-op.
Could be useful actually.
Yeah.
It's like the basis of a component system. You need like, you know how like a basis of a number system, you need like a multiplicative inverse and all the existence of a zero. This is like the basis of a component system. You need like a no-op component.
I was thinking it's like when you have the developer on your team who always messes things up. You can be like, just build these providerless components.
You get to use only these providerless ones. It's like, yeah, those pages you've been writing lately have been really good.
They're awesome.
So, yeah, it's a challenge with this stuff to distill it down. And, but we try not to, you want to get a little bit into the details because you need to see the syntax and like work through it to really have it sink in. But so it's a little bit of that, but it's not just the theory. It has some of the theory too. It has some of the details. But, another thing we've realized is like, this is like an intro. And then the real way to solidify this stuff, we think the best way to learn basically how to use these things effectively is pairing with someone who's like, who knows this stuff. And then that's where our videos derive from that idea. It's like the second best thing, or the way we can best replicate that pairing experience, which is why our videos these days are much more that natural pairing style as opposed to what they used to be. So just practicing and seeing them over and over again, they're just going to step out at you and like, this is a leaf component that doesn't have a lot of state, or this is a renderless component that is just going to control access, and I need to share this thing. Here's how I do it with a component, or here's how I make my UI more declarative. That's where the practice comes in. So the email course is meant to be an introduction, and then if you're new to some of the patterns, there's lots of ways you can learn them. We will have EmberMap videos on all of them, but there's also, we've talked about them in podcasts. You can learn about them from conference talks. So that's kind of like, that's kind of the idea behind it.
Yep.
So that'll be good to get that out. And right now you can actually sign up for it if you're not logged into EmberMap and you go to one of our free videos, because that's how this started. But we realized it's going to be useful for everyone. So we're going to have a whole dedicated page for it soon. So
yeah, look out for that.
Yeah. This week or next week, we should commit.
Podcast driven development.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. What else have you been working on?
Florida won over the weekend. So did the Patriots, so did the Red Sox. It was a good weekend for sports.
Good weekend for sports from people that lived in Florida and Boston.
Yeah, exactly. I also got LeBron on my fantasy basketball team.
Nice.
It's pretty good. You have a draft tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, is that why you have to leave work early?
Yeah.
It's fair enough. What do we want to talk about next?
I've been doing some Node stuff. I can't fill an episode with it.
I just finished the functional CSS. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
And tweet and stuff.
All right.
I recorded the last episode of the functional CSS series.
Nice.
So that's been a long one.
How long is it?
Oh, I don't know. It's over 3 hours, I think, at this point. But there's a lot we wanted to cover, so we just kind of treated this as an unbounded series and just kind of go week by week, which was fun because you get to react to input about the videos and kind of go where you want to go without having to plan everything ahead of time. We wrapped up kind of in an open-ended way where, and this is basically reflects our thinking on this stuff right now, which is, we use Tailwind for low level. That's kind of our approach to styling. But there's still this question of when it comes time to abstract components, what's the best way to do that? We use Ember components, and then there's still some open questions around, variants. Like you have a button and you want a green button and a white button, a small button, a big button. How do you do that? And we have a pattern that we like to use, but it's not something we would want to say, here's how you should do it. Whereas like with data loading, there's like things that go outside of like bread and butter Ember, where we would say like, this is a more correct way to do it. Like you should declare your data needs in the route as opposed to in your links or something like that. Mm-hmm. And we could argue for that and say like every team should be doing that. Whereas with the styling stuff, it's still too open-ended and kind of like nebulous for us to really be able to say. So the recommendation right now is really just, here's how you could do some of these different approaches. And the goal being to find something that works for you and your team and find a good way to enforce it. We're using something that we wrote, and I want to link to it in that video just to give folks an idea. They can copy paste it into their apps and just they can see kind of where we're thinking is. but we wrote a mix in and have it tested and everything, and it lets you do something like a UI button with like a style, and that's a string that accepts a space separated list of words, similar to how class works on HTML elements. And you can say, big and blue. And if you don't have big defined, and if you don't have blue defined, you're going to get an error. And if you try a big red blue button, you're going to get an error because those both belong to the same style group. So that's kind of the goal, should be to have that kind of feedback. Ideally, you would even move it to compile time, but we haven't just carved out the time to do that yet. But that is the kind of feedback that we think you should have, especially because the purpose of these things are to enforce consistent branding.
Yeah.
So,
and I think we can still provide a recommendation. I mean, our recommendation is you should do this stuff in components.
yes.
What exactly that API is. We use a style string.
Right.
Other folks, like, we'll say style big red button.
Right.
Other folks will say, color red, size big.
Right. Two different arguments. If you go to like style components, which is a popular styling component library for React, you'd see that they would show similar kinds of things. Actually, they even use attributes, just presence attributes, like Booleans, basically, presence, like checked, how like checked.
Yeah, like,
so
data attributes can be like that, where they don't have a value.
Exactly. So it would just be like button, and then it would be primary, just as like a kind of element space naked string that's props.primary, and it's just true because it's present. So you'd have button and then like primary and then like red. And so you can just, in your implementation, you're doing like things like props.primary ? Props.red ?
Cool.
So that's pretty neat. I like the style argument because first of all, the name spacing, like primary could mean other things. And now it's just kind of clear it's in a style attribute. Like someone said, I asked about this on Twitter, and someone was talking about, it's a little confusing because actually style is a HTML attribute. So maybe you could call it like variant or kind, button, kind, big red, blue, big red or something like that. Big red sounds like a mascot. It's my big red button, So you could use a different word. Maybe that's better. That would not collide with like a HTML attribute like style. But I like the idea of one attribute that's just namespaced. It's like data or attributes or actions. It's just like a namespace for all these things, because all those are going to be user land definitions. And so you won't be able to you don't want to have to restrict those at all. As we've learned with lots of things, like if you make an ORM and you have a model, it's good to be able to have people say like is destroyed as a property and not have to worry about it colliding with like the base model class. So like putting everything under an attributes key would be a good idea. So that's going to be the last video for Tailwind, and we'll have a link to that mixin, and that's what we used during the Tailwind training this year, and people like that too. I had aspirations to open source something, but realized it's something that's too big of a problem space, and I think there's some lower level stuff there that could be had first, like kind of what we've been talking about the last few weeks.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
Yeah, be interesting to see. It would be interesting to see kind of like do a survey, if I could ask folks in React and Vue if there's any consensus around this stuff, if there's something that people are doing everywhere, just to see what people are coalescing around in terms of APIs. I think that would be interesting. So I might ask about that if anyone knows about that. Just like a survey of all the style component libraries and how they treat this stuff, how they let people define variants, what the APIs are. That would be really interesting to see. So
cool.
Yeah.
What else? What else have we been? I've been writing some Node code.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. Just fixing up some FastBoot stuff, kind of abstracting it, getting some tests in. It's good. Always good to have. Gary Bernhardt tweeted about feedback loops and testing, and he was complaining that browser-based tests are too slow. And I kind of noticed this when I was working on Node. I'd fire up the Mocha with its watcher. It watches a directory, and then anytime you make changes, it just reruns your entire test suite.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times where I would save a file and then Alt-Tab to my terminal and the test would be complete before I even alt tabbed. And that's just something that like I've completely lost with browser based testing.
And this was just in the terminal. The Mocha was running the terminal.
Mocha was running the terminal.
And it didn't need a browser at all.
No,
because you were just running Node.
I'm writing Node tests, yeah. So server tests, but it was.
You got a sense for what he was talking about.
Yeah, and it brought me back to like
Ruby TDD flow.
Definitely TDD flow. I mean, I do way less TDD in an Ember app. And I've talked about this before.
Yeah,
but I'm definitely more write my component, write my API, write some tests, maybe tweak the component, go back and fix those tests. But it's definitely not a TDD style.
Right.
I call it like test before commit.
Right.
But with going back to the server app and getting that super fast feedback loop, it's pretty nice.
That's cool. Yeah, I remember him saying, he was basically saying like it basically precludes entire categories of workflow when you have feedback that takes longer than 250 milliseconds is what he was saying. He was like, because basically 250 milliseconds from a human perspective is like basically instantaneous. They've talked about this with like UIs before. And so it's like effectively instant. And once you click something and you wait more than 200 milliseconds for any feedback, then you feel like you're waiting. Whereas under 200 or 250 milliseconds, like you don't feel like you're waiting. So that's his whole point is like, I'm just needing to get instant feedback when I'm making changes. And as soon as if the baseline is more than 250 milliseconds, it's beyond that. And he was like talking about compilers and stuff, TypeScript taking a long time, browsers taking a long time. So yeah, it's interesting. I think even if you had fast feedback, I don't know exactly what TDD would look like with a lot of visual stuff. But there's definitely situations where you're working on the wiring up the actions and the logic for filling out a form.
You know, that's a good point because every time that you change TDD, if I'm changing something on the server, like server code, there's always a test I can write for that. Always.
Right.
If I'm changing something on the client, there's not. I mean, there is.
I mean, if I gave you a design and said build this, but like
there's not a test
mobile,
I can write.
Tablet sizing, like you can't write a test that says I know when I'm done is when this thing is implemented because it's just there's too many states for the UI, like width and like the text sizes. I mean, all that stuff. There's just way too many things. So
I mean, UI developers will change stuff all the time and not write a test for it.
Yeah.
CSS. I mean,
yeah. I try not to change JavaScript without writing a test, right?
Do you TDD it though?
No, but if I was going to have a PR that had JavaScript, it's probably going to have a test with it, right?
100%.
As opposed to templates and CSS.
Yeah, I don't think I would. I'm not recommending that you shouldn't.
No, I'm just saying like if you think about the part of UI development that's like, it's like what we're saying, right? Like the design, HTML, CSS stuff. A lot of it is probably going to be you could change it and not.
Yeah, there's no easy way to test it.
No easy way to test it, yeah.
So it's more than feedback loops then?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
So I think part of that is the fact that you're working in a constrained environment. You know a lot about what needs to get done. So what were you doing? What were the changes you were making?
So we have our FastBoot code.
And it now doesn't use FastBoot app server. We just use the FastBoot lib.
Yeah.
Which is
Ember
CLI FastBoot or?
No. Ember. So there's
FastBoot server.
FastBoot. Just FastBoot. There's FastBoot, which gives you an API to take an Ember route and generate HTML.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're using. And then there's all these other libraries that are built on top of that. So Ember CLI FastBoot is built on top of that. It's a thing that when you're in development mode, when you're running Ember CLI, it calls out to FastBoot so that Ember CLI can generate FastBoot pages for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also FastBoot app server, which is like this thing you run in production. There's FastBoot middleware, which is an express middleware that calls down to this FastBoot thing. So you can imagine like there's all these layers that just keep building up.
Mm-hmm.
We use just that bottom piece, the FastBoot API.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, just because we have some requirements around caching, when to generate pages. And so the architecture doesn't really fit in with the other pieces. So
right. And you were asking some folks how they are using FastBoot as well, because you've gone through this process and learned all this stuff.
Yep. I would say it's all over the place.
Yeah.
Some people use FastBoot app server. Some people use only the middleware, and other folks do what we do. It's interesting. I've also asked like why FastBoot? Why
did they first add it to their stack?
Like why do you need it? And the most common answer is like meta tags for bots, SEO,
Which is why we added it.
Which is why we added it, yeah. And so it's not.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't really care about the HTML that gets generated.
Right.
It's only the HTML that's in the head tag.
Right. Now we do. I mean, at this point,
you get some nice things.
I mean, after lots of engineering, but at this point, it's really nice that embermap.com loads so fast.
Yeah.
And it's an Ember app.
Server rendered HTML.
Yeah. Can't beat it.
Hard to beat. Yeah. Yeah.
But there maybe is a stepping stone there that's easier than this for a lot of people.
Would we have been okay with just a tool that generates a head tag?
Right. I mean, we would have gotten other things done, right? We wouldn't have been working on this as much. So you would have been able to work on other things.
Site wouldn't be as fast.
Right.
But yeah.
Right. So cool. Interesting stuff. So so what's just asking because we haven't talked about it in a while, like what's on your short stack of like the next few things like that you would want to tackle if you were just working on the FastBoot side of EmberMap.com?
Yeah. So we had all of our code just in our EmberMap code base. And so it was all mixed. There was like how we're doing things with kind of like some general FastBoot ideas. And so I've been teasing that apart and I've got a piece of it where it's like, this is general, anyone could use it. It's not open source because I'm not at a point where I can maintain it. So I'm using Yarn workspaces, which are amazing. They're really, really amazing.
Tell me more.
In repo add-ons for JavaScript packages.
Oh,
the
cool.
best way. So I can have a workspace, which you can think of as like a JavaScript module package. Module's not a good word. NPM package, and it's just nested in my in our Ember app. And so it has its own package.json.
Oh, cool.
Has its own entry points, all that stuff. So it's really nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love it because I can just be developing on like the package, but I can still have all the files side by side.
You don't have to link. You don't have to.
No linking. Yarn takes care of all of it for you.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I think there's like some big open source projects that use this pattern where it's like they are multiple.
A monorepo.
Yeah, monorepo. Yeah. So they're multiple packages, but you just can consume the one big package. So I think like Babel's like this.
Nice.
Makes development a lot easier. But teasing that apart. So taking out the general stuff from our code base and getting it into its own package that generally like surfaces like better architecture, better API. It's easier to write tests.
Yep.
So one of the tests is like what should our FastBoot server do when the Ember app errors?
Right.
And I don't really want to put an error into embermap.com, but I want to write a test for this. Right. So having it as its own package means I can have a test app in that package, a test project in that package that has a bunch of
test Ember app that would fail on a route when rendering a route in FastBoot. Oh,
so
cool.
exactly that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I have an Ember app. I have I have two Ember apps. One is a basic like hello world Ember app.
Yeah.
Just Ember new. No FastBoot, no nothing. Well, it's like what should this, when given this type of app, how should you render this? Because we don't FastBoot every page. So I want to test that our server can handle this sort of situation.
Yeah.
It's like just a basic Ember app. Then I also have an Ember app in here that's like it's a FastBoot app. So how does this server render a FastBoot app? How does the server render a FastBoot app
with a bad route?
With a bad
jQuery
route
or something.
Yeah. How does the server? Yeah, exactly. That's why I do. I reference document.
Yeah, document. Yeah. Perfect.
What about like a 404? So this is like an interesting situation that I uncovered during all this.
Huh.
Say you have non-FastBoot, no FastBoot, and you're rendering a route, and it's like 404. So at the end of your route file, you have like a not found catch-all route.
Yep.
Now think about this. Your browser connects to the server and says like, okay, give me /not/found. And the server is going to respond with the Ember, like the index.html.
It does have it.
It does have it. So the server responds with a 200.
Oh.
And now the client boots up your single page app. Ember can't find the route. And so Ember then displays your not found page.
Right.
So it's like this
The
weird.
browser request is actually the response is actually 200.
The response is a 200.
It's always 200.
Yeah, it's always a 200 because you can always serve.
Interesting. Is that that's problematic? It seems like the browser.
Yeah, it would be nice if you. It would be nice,
especially like a redirect, right? What would a redirect look like? Because that's something where the browser actually, the browser knows what to do. It changes its behavior based on that status code, right?
So redirect, you wouldn't. So if you were serving a redirect from like an Ember app, so it's like you're telling the router to redirect, that's a 200, and then you serve the Ember app, and then the Ember app does like replace history, whatever the API is to replace the history, to replace the URL in the browser.
Right.
So that would be a 200 as well. Yeah. So I guess that follows this pattern.
So that makes sense there. Now, if you were redirecting to an external thing, you'd want.
There's no like API and there's no API in Ember.
Well, you would do this in the server. You would somehow have to see. How would you be able to see that it's a redirect?
Well, the server can respond with 3.0x to redirect. Ember has a notion of redirects.
Yeah, but internal to the Ember app.
Internal Ember. Same with not found though. Ember has like a notion of not found, but again, it's internal to the Ember app.
Right.
So when like you're serving up these pages,
right,
it's weird. It's just like a weird situation that you're going to run into.
Seems like you need a way to communicate more. Seems like app.visit that returns HTML string is not enough. You also need
app.visit. So I'm talking about non-FastBoot.
Okay. So in FastBoot.
So in a non-FastBoot app, you have no way of communicating this.
Agreed.
In a FastBoot app, you do have a way of communicating.
Okay. So your node server could say, FastBoot just gave me a 304, so I'm going to return with a 304. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Of course, we do that already. Yeah. So.
And in FastBoot, you can say like, our not found route never was setting the status code to 404 because our not found route was made to be run client side. It's a client side app.
How do you do that, by the way? How do you?
So FastBoot has an API for setting the status code.
You do it in route or something?
Yeah, we do. I do it in the route. I do it in after model.
Oh, cool.
I figure like,
how do you do it? What's the API?
It's this.get fastboot dot response dot status.
That's so interesting that you do that in your Ember app.
You do it in your Ember app. But this is the thing, like
that's cool.
Going back to what I'm saying where I'm like abstracting all this. Yeah. This is where I want these test projects.
Yeah.
And I want to know that like when I'm serving up these situations, whether it's a client app, server side app, I'm going to get different status codes depending on if it's FastBoot or not.
Right. That makes sense that with the vanilla Ember app, you're not going to be able to do anything with it because your server is already branching based on the status code. It's just that with a non-FastBoot Ember app, your Ember app doesn't tell you anything about the status code, but with a FastBoot Ember app, it actually can.
Yeah.
Based on the request.
Yes, exactly.
So that's
So getting
cool.
tests in place for this, and it's like there's
interesting
so many
test.
different situations you can have. And
Yep.
There's also too. It's like FastBoot. Let's say you don't.
I guess the boundary test is like I'm a node server and I call like my FastBoot Ember app dot visit and it returns like a JavaScript object with like a code of 304 or something like that. And then I would expect to send a 304 or something like that.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
If you were to like stub out the entire FastBoot Ember app or something like that. But the fact that you can have a test app in there and do it that way gives you a lot more confidence.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's what you would want to do.
Plus the
stubbing thing.
The stubbing thing, it's too brittle because the FastBoot API could change. Yeah. I want to say like when I have a FastBoot app.
Totally. Way more confident.
And there's also in FastBoot, there's not only this, but like we have a 404 route. Like we have a route that catches all missed routes.
Right.
But what happens if like your FastBoot app errors with like the Ember router saying like URL not recognized? Like what is that? Is that a 500? Is that a 400? It's like thinking about how to handle that.
Is that possible when you have a 404?
Yeah, you can
catch
go to
all?
No. But if you don't have a 404,
if you don't. If you don't.
So what happens there?
Yeah.
Do you like catch that error and hide it and then return a 404 to the browser?
I guess if this were an open source thing, you wouldn't make any assumptions about that. So you would have to say 500x or whatever because it's just Ember. From my perspective, it's an Ember error.
It's an Ember error.
Yeah.
And then something further down the line.
That's what your Ember app would do. Your Ember app wouldn't show something graceful. It would just blow up as an error.
White screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The default Ember 404 page. Yeah.
So these are situations that I don't want to introduce into the EmberMap code base.
Right.
I don't want to have our Ember app ever route not recognized error.
Right.
So this is why splitting this off, getting test projects.
Cool.
So yeah,
That's awesome.
And Yarn workspaces are so amazing here.
That's awesome. I remember you tweeting about the fact that the testing stuff is good too.
Yeah.
ES6 and the testing libraries make it feel a lot better than.
I mean, the last time I wrote Node was years ago. And
Yeah.
it's just, first.
Prototype dot
Yeah.
method and
then like the Node APIs, like the way there's like, they followed a format where it's like a call, they all take a callback and the first argument to the callback is an error. And the second argument is like the data that the callback should receive. So you have these callbacks and they're all always start off with like, if first argument or like if error is not null, then like handle the error. And it's just, you very, very quickly end up with like tests that are just like pyramids of callbacks. And the async await stuff and promises being kind of like everywhere now, just make this, it's a joy to write.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So, and it's fast.
That's cool. I'd like to rewrite a lot of the Mirage code with that stuff now. I know a lot of it would look different if I wrote it today for the first time.
Yeah.
Because it was like 3 years ago. So
ES6 is awesome.
yeah, exactly. Cool. I think one more thing we can just talk about quickly here to wrap this episode up is some of the Mirage stuff we've been tossing around some ideas for where that project could go. At one point we talked about this and asked, we were kind of thinking about asking folks, we were thinking about the problem of showing work, and we asked folks to tell us how they show off new features that they've built, because this is something that Mirage is good for. You can build a feature front end first, and I found that people still discover this. I think it's not maybe super clear, but the way we use Mirage, or anyone could use a tool like Mirage that basically lets you mock out your API layer and you get to go kind of front end first. And
I think there's sometimes hesitation when we bring this up because folks say like, look, I don't want to build an app against a Mirage API because then when I deploy it, my backend could be different.
Right.
So,
and that's totally valid.
Yeah.
That being said, from our perspective, like we've found so much success with doing the front end first thing that compared to how we used to build apps where you start thinking about the data model and doing your database modeling and stuff, and then you do the UI, like it's just so much better. You get so much more feedback, and really your backend should be supporting your in support of your front end. That's why you're building it. And so starting with the end, starting with the consumer, basically.
I was just thinking like I don't ever run rake db migrate down and then like change the migration and then remigrate.
Which is something you used to be able to do.
Yeah, all the time. I would do all the time
time
because I'm developing the API as I'm developing the front end.
Right.
But now when it comes time to write the Rails or the backend code, I know exactly what the API should look like because I can look at the Mirage config.
Right. So, thinking about showing off the work using Mirage, like having a hosted version of your Ember app with Mirage, that's just a way to show like your PM the new feature and being able to set up different like backend scenarios easily without having to ask your backend team or you yourself doing the backend code to like get different staging environments with different configurations of data. Like you can do all that, and people have invested work to make that stuff easy, but it's not easy out of the box. I think there's a place there, and you could imagine like some really nice DX for that kind of thing. But I think since we've been talking about some of the other use cases, like the real big values here is like when you do buy into this kind of front end first flow of development where the front end drives your API and you, like you said, you take that contract and you just go ahead and implement it. You learn a lot, you get a lot of feedback that way. And the other thing is like you wouldn't feel, because the boundary is HTTP, request and response, you're not locking anyone into making certain decisions on the back end. You're not, you can build the whole front end completely tested features using the mock API, and then you can go and implement that using Rails. You could use it Python, you could with Laravel, because it's HTTP. That's the boundary, that's the cutoff. And so there's something really nice about that being the boundary, because it's it doesn't force you to make any production decisions. A front-end developer can basically build the entire front end, true front end that's tested, and production ready code. It's production ready front end.
Do you know what a really good example of this is with many-to-many relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So with many relationships, the front end can be built without even modeling the join model.
Mm-hmm.
The front end, you can just say a post has many tags and a tag has many posts, and you never even introduce or have to think about post tag.
Right.
And now when the backend developer goes to build it, you're not prescribing this implementation to them.
Right.
And they can do whatever they want. And because you have that boundary.
Yep. And it's very clear. Yep, totally. Of course, the implementation of the back end informs sometimes the things on the front end, because doing it a certain way will make it easier or not. So that's where it's good to have a good understanding of basic data modeling and basic HTTP semantics, and what a good looking JSON API payload looks like to make our lives easier. But the idea still is that you can learn so much, and there's still 100 different ways you can do things. I mean, just think about our homepage, right? When we went through that exercise. So there's something really cool that I think we've come to realize and believe is like this idea that you can make a production code on the front end, even if you're kind of in this development or prototyping phase of work. Now, front end developers who want to get a lot of work done without going into the back end maybe would today use something like Firebase. And that's like something we've done at work in the past or on personal projects. You have your front end tools and you're just, going to town. You're just in the flow, and you don't, even if you know Rails, you don't want to stop and set up a database and all this stuff. Firebase is awesome for that kind of thing, because you can just hook up Firebase, especially if you're using Ember data and you literally don't write a single line of code. You're creating models. Mirage is pretty close to that, right? The problem with Firebase is that what does my data look like when it actually goes over the wire? That is all completely abstracted to me. And once it comes time to have my backend team build this or to build this myself, I actually need to understand that now. So because that's all hidden away, it's how's this actually going to work? There's also things that Firebase does that your backend might not be able to do, like syncing and pushing data back to the client. Yep. So just the fact that you're using Firebase to prototype your app, you're actually making a Firebase app. You're making a Firebase app, but you're also making like back-end production decisions, because you're saying the back end is going to be built with Firebase as soon as you add Firebase to your app. And if it's not, it's going to have to implement the same features and functionality that Firebase does. So support for WebSockets and the format of the payload. Good luck. Yeah, right. Because it's all hidden on purpose. That's a purpose, but there's no smooth path from Firebase to a Rails app or a Laravel app. Whereas with Mirage, it's all about surfacing. It's really about communicating that contract. And we've talked a lot about different features that could show that contract more easily and clearly, so it's even easier than it already is just by looking at the config, but you can actually see like the routes and stuff. So we've been talking about this idea because there's this idea of like, you're making an app and you're a front-end developer, and you might be like us, you might know backend, you might know how to build servers, but really you're like interested in building this front-end thing that kind of works. And you get in that flow with your tools like Ember and stuff, and then you don't want to ever have to slow down. And I think part of what's nice about Mirage is that it lets you kind of keep going. What if it could let you keep going kind of all the way? And people have asked about deploying Mirage before, and we've always been like, it doesn't really make sense to deploy Mirage. Mirage is a tool for developers. It's to help you write tests and develop faster. But when it comes to an actual production server, as anyone who's written a production server knows, there's 100 concerns that are never going to be part of Mirage. Authentication stuff, and it's just security is a great example. Like production security concerns don't belong in a tool that's just meant to really make a front-end developer's life easier. Yeah, you're never going to add pundit or some policy files to Mirage. Yeah, exactly. So it was always like, that doesn't really make sense to do that. But since we've been talking, it's like, well, what if it made what would it look like to take that? You have your production front end and it works on your computer, and against Mirage, you can make something that's very high fidelity. It feels and looks like a full production Ember app. And the code you're writing in the Ember app and the test you're writing is production code. So just like we said, even the data layer transport stuff, you're not making production decisions. You're writing production front end code. I think we should define production code because it probably means a lot to different people. So the easiest way I think about this is we've been at companies in the past where there's like designers, front end folks who aren't writing back end code, and they might spike something new or build a new feature, and they're going to end up, let's say they spin up a new Rails app, and just to help get some data to drive their front end, to help them build it. But that code, maybe their front end code is like just using jQuery to query the Rails app because they just need to get something going. And in the real app, it's not just going to use jQuery to hit an arbitrary endpoint that gets them the data they need. It's going to do what a real app would do, which is like use resources in a properly structured API.
Yep.
So
it's like not production code is not prototype code.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, and that's the thing. If you have the knowledge that goes to this HTTP boundary, you can write a whole Ember app with a well-structured API layer in Mirage, and then just hand that off to anyone, and everything from that boundary forward is production-ready code. It's not going to have to be rewritten once you implement the backend.
Not going to be thrown away.
It's not going to be thrown away. That's kind of what you mean by that. So that's great, and you have that on your computer now with Mirage. You can show someone that. What if you could show someone that in a live server environment? What if you could push it one step further and get that prototype, that front end that you're building, that is truly production code, but is not a production app until there's a real back end. But what if you could use Mirage and deploy it in a way that, oh, hey, your Mirage API is actually an implementation of the contract that you need for this thing to run, which is eventually going to be built by your production backend team. But right now, you can do it yourself with Mirage, and you were to push it up to some service and you were to get a database for it. And now you can actually use this thing. And again, we talk a lot about cheap ways of learning, cheap ways of getting feedback on our apps before committing a bunch of engineering resources to it. And yeah, this is basically just taking that one step further. And instead of calling you over to my computer, I can just put it up on the internet.
So it's like, another way to say this, it's like a deployable Mirage app for the sake of deploying the front end.
Yeah.
So getting Mirage running on a real server,
yep,
so that the front end can be used against a real server without committing the front end to saying that like that Mirage server is going to be our production server, because it's not.
Right, it's not.
And we're not going to pretend it is.
Right.
It's going to be very clear, like this Mirage code you're writing is throwaway code, or it's code written for tests.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you need to stop developing the front end.
Right, exactly. And you can iterate on the front end. And it could give you even more just like Mirage locally gives you a ton of feedback and helps you iterate on your front end code to get it ready. Seeing your front end code against a real live server, seeing it maybe there's two people using some feature chatting.
Yeah. Well, just think about, we talked about this, like building a tic-tac-toe game.
Yeah.
And so you could have two people on the same browser, just sitting at the same computer playing tic-tac-toe, and you get a lot of good feedback.
Right.
But you're going to get even more feedback if there's two players
on two different computers.
Two different computers with network latency,
right,
playing tic-tac-toe.
Yep. And it's a real production app. Even though it uses a server that's meant for development.
The front end.
The front end is production code. And if you could get it to a point where it's ready and you say, give me a fast backend that fulfills this contract, and we're done.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
It's really cool.
So that I think for me flipped the bit in terms of, would it make sense to make Mirage deployable for the sake of this purpose while still keeping it in the spirit of its original purpose, which is to help developers like build faster. It's not about replacing Rails.
Yeah. Another use case for this I just thought of is like the demo. We know that yep, a bunch of folks out there use Mirage to demo their application.
Yep.
So what if?
Yeah, and we've seen people install Ember on customer support people's computers just so they can run Ember Serve against Mirage and show off the front end they're building to potential customers. Well, what if you just had a URL that did it instead, and it was fast enough with the demo scenarios? It didn't have to support all the requirements that a real production server does, but you're able to use the Mirage server and show the real production front end, and that way you validate something. You validate something, and so now you realize it's time to build it, or you learn something and you change it. But the point is, yeah, you don't have to throw everything away. Super cheap. And once you're ready, the front end is ready to go. It's production code. So I think there's a lot of really cool use cases there. So that's something we're thinking about, and something I would love to hear people's feedback on. We asked about how do you show work. Some people have done something similar with Mirage where they can configure it to put it up on S3 and use it with a static site. A lot of times that's limited to local storage. So a single user's computer or browser. The idea of like the tic-tac-toe between two computers, I think, is a real test, because that's like, that needs an actual server.
Yeah.
And if you made it easy to deploy that, I think it could be really cool. It's also like, we've been talking a lot about optimizing Ember for the kind of weekend warrior avatar, where like you want to just try something new for a side project, but you don't want to stop, and people have said that too, that, oh, I went through the tutorial on the site, but like it's hooked up to Mirage, and like, what do I do now? And it's like, well, yeah, you need a server, but like, that's kind of a crappy answer if you think about it. On the one hand, it's understandable. It's like, well, yeah, you're writing a front end, you need a back end, and this is not about back end. But then it's like, well, why did I just go through all this effort to make a front end if it's useless to me without a back end? And what if it basically wasn't? What if you basically already had a back end, even though it was like SQLite instead of MySQL? But SQLite is perfect for your first Rails app. It's actually perfect for it.
Yeah.
And then you get the feedback of a real database.
And it passes that production code test, because all the Rails code that you write against SQLite, you don't need to now go throw it away when you plug in Postgres or MySQL.
Exactly. So yeah, I think everyone would say who's gone through that, who've learned Rails, it's awesome that when you start a new Rails app, you get SQLite.
Yeah.
It's just awesome. Even though the adapter pattern is great and it works, there's still so many steps to get going. There's all these little things that can bite you. Mm-hmm. And so if you could basically kick that can down the road and get people feedback faster, give them a live URL that has a real server and real persistence, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really awesome.
And just like continuing with that SQLite thread, like the difference between like SQLite and Postgres is minimal. Right. I mean, they're whatever. It's minimal.
Once you have a big app, it's different. But for the weekend warrior, it's basically,
So imagine you could do that same thing with Mirage and a real backend.
Yep.
And just be able to swap the two out. Think about how much more time you'd be able to focus on the front end, evaluating the front end, like making the front end, testing the front end.
Right.
So much more time there before you have to get,
bogged down. Yep. Do I use Rails for this? It's funny because we had talked about this last week, and then Friday on my way home, I was listening to The Art of Product, which is a great podcast we both listened to, highly recommend it. And they had a guest on, and it was their buddy, and he was talking about, he's like an entrepreneur guy, and he's always been front end dude, like HTML, CSS. He knows product, he's in that zone, but he's never done a lot of back end stuff. And he's working on a new idea, but he actually has enough kind of recurring income from something that he has enough time, and he's learning Rails because he's frustrated with, it's like literally the conversation we had last week. He's like, I'm frustrated with not being able to make a real app. I know exactly what I want, but I have to wait either for another designer or a developer on the back end, or have to pay someone, and I don't want to have to do that anymore. And so I'm taking the time to learn Rails. And Ben was telling him, like, this is a good idea. Like, programming is a superpower, and like over the next 20 years, you're going to have a lot of ideas, and it's good to try it.
But not only that, like, given the tool set today, if someone was like, yeah, I need to create an actual backend to hook my front end up to, that's why I would tell them to use Rails. It's the easiest thing to get started with.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it sucks.
Yeah, it does.
It sucks having to.
I mean, that's the thing. And then I was like, man, this guy's like, I'm a front end person. I know how to do everything. It's just I need persistence, obviously, to test this thing out. And so now I have to learn Rails. And he's talking about like Stack Overflowing and all the places that he's running into. It's like so painful, relatively speaking. And I was like, yeah, well, we've gotten Mirage to a point where, you have 10 years of Rails experience, and you choose to use Mirage instead of Rails at this point. So it's like, if it works for you because it makes you more productive, then it should definitely work for this guy.
It's so much easier it is so much easier to change some data in a Mirage scenario or a factory than it is to go migrate down, edit some seeds, migrate up, rerun those seeds. I love Rails. My backend is always going to be written in Rails. Yeah. But I'm going to get it working in Mirage first.
Yeah. So that was like, I was like, wow, is this like a sign from God? I'm like walking home, like the birds are chirping, and this guy is my head. He's like, I'm a front end developer, and I need like just a server. I just want an easy way to make a server with stuff that I know. And it's like, well, yeah, that's basically what Mirage ended up being. It's like JavaScript. And I was thinking, like, there is something to be said for JavaScript. Like, I know people talk about Node, and they're like, oh, you get the same language on the front end and back end, and we're just kind of like turning our nose at that. It's like, it doesn't really matter what the language is. But then it's like, no, there's a ton of familiarity you get. And if someone is hacking around with React or Ember or whatever, and they know JavaScript, and you can say, here, you want to persist some users, just type like this.resource users. And there's like, you know how to do that. You know JavaScript, you're in your code. Like there's something we've said for that. It's a lot of familiarity there.
I think that the benefit, I'm going to go off on a tangent, the benefit of having them in the same language is that you know that language and the ideas translate between the front and the back. And the thing that we roll our eyes at is when someone's like, I'm going to write a model and it's going to be the same model on the front and back end. And those are they're just two different environments, two concerns.
Right. So yeah, it just made me think like you could really nail this onboarding story. Like I have my front end app and I just want to keep going. I hit a place where I need dynamic data and I don't want to stop and learn Rails for the next 8 months. I don't want to spin up a new throwaway Rails app because that's costly. I mean, it's not super costly, but it's more costly than just
a great test for this. A great test for this is this guy that's going to go off and build his Rails app so he can get persistence. So one day this is going to turn into a real product.
Right.
So at that point,
what do you do with that code?
Does he throw away the Rails app and then say like, hey, backend developer that does this full time, build me a real backend?
That's exactly what he said. He's like, one day, I'm going to get a co-founder and he'll probably just come and just throw this whole thing away. But until then, like this is going to work for me. It's going to help me get to market.
Yeah.
And so it's like, the cool thing about Mirage is that not only could it help, like let's say help you get to market, but it stays around because of the testing stuff. So it's not throwaway code. It's throwaway in the sense that it's not a real production server because it serves other purposes, but it could also serve that get to market thing real quick.
Yeah. I mean, not only that, even if you didn't have tests, you're always get to market there's going to be another get to market in 6 weeks from now.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, having Mirage is just,
So I think there's some interesting paths we could go down here, but I would love to it's also like fun thinking about it took us a while to get there, but now I could just get on a soapbox and scream about like if you're writing database design tables of your thing before and you haven't written your HTML and CSS yet, it's like no, do it front end first.
Yeah,
front to back.
You're building a UI.
Yeah,
build the UI first.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to change. It's going to inform so many things about it, and you can avoid all those migrations, even if Rails makes it easy or Phoenix makes it easy or whatever. There should be a cheaper way to do it. So,
yeah, Rails makes it super easy, but at the end of the day, Rails is it's a production server,
right?
And so you have to learn all that stuff,
right? Yep. Yeah, it's not built for front end developers building out and prototyping new ideas, and testing new ideas. So, yeah, there's no real server that's made for front end developers if you think about it.
Sorry, getting excited. There are some servers that like they will echo back whatever you send to it. So if you post a JSON payload, they will just echo back that same payload. Okay. So you can imagine like, but that I guess if you're conforming your front end code to like use those servers, your front end code is no longer production front end code
because you're real server. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those servers aren't going to look like my Rails or my Phoenix server. Whereas like a Rails and a Phoenix server are going to look the same.
They're going to do more than echo back.
Yeah, exactly. So,
pretty nice.
Yeah, pretty cool to think about that position and how that could help folks out. So we're going to be pulling on that thread here in the upcoming months and kind of be interesting to hear what people have to say about it.
Yeah.
Lot to think about and chew on there.
Yes.
Cool.
Nice.
Shall we wrap it?
Yeah, let's wrap it.
All right. If you like listening to us talk about the proletariat on this podcast, be sure to go to iTunes and give us only a 5-star review so that we can continue working off the backs of the proletariat. I like that. That should be like the byline on our homepage, I think. Helping programmers coast off the back of the proletariat. No? Okay, I think that's a no. We'll have to see. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.